Support for Amanpour comes from our friends at Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Home plays a big role in your life. That's why Quicken Loans created Rocket Mortgage. It lets you apply simply and understand the entire mortgage process fully, so you can be confident you're getting the right mortgage for you. To get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/Amanpour.
Tonight, out of maximum chaos, is a Trump doctrine emerging? I speak to the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg, who took that very question to the White House. Plus, why cyber is the new weapon of mass disruption. My conversation with the New York Times national security correspondent David Sanger about his new book, The Perfect Weapon. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the program. I'm Amanpour in London. From the southern United States border to the ports of Spain to Germany's seat of power, immigration is front and center. After Italy closed its borders, hundreds of migrants on board the Aquarius ship celebrate finally finding a port in the storm in Spain. In Germany, a row over refugee policy is threatening Europe's longest-serving and most respected leader, Chancellor Angela Merkel. And in the United States, the harsh spectacle of children being forcibly separated from their parents at the Mexican border is receiving criticism from both sides of the aisle and from two very powerful women. The First Lady, Melania Trump, has made a rare political intervention, saying the United States should govern with heart. The former First Lady, Laura Bush, a Republican, has penned a scathing column in the Washington Post, calling the policy cruel and reminiscent of forced internment of the Japanese during World War II. Now, this zero-tolerance approach of the Trump administration is just one part of the Trump doctrine that we're going to delve into with my guest, Jeffrey Goldberg. He's the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. He's been speaking to a number of people close to the president to ask them to define what exactly that doctrine is. And Jeffrey Goldberg is joining me now from Washington. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So, Jeffrey, your title of your article has a pretty bold headline. Senior White House official defines the Trump doctrine. We're America, and I'm just going to say it rhymes with rich. Were you shocked by that?
Was I shocked by that?
Yeah.
No, I'm not. I'm not shocked by anything. I'm not really shocked by anything anymore. That was one of the slogans that people came up with for me when I was asking them this question. If you could put into a slogan or a saying something other than America first, which we know, obviously, and this is one of them that came up. This is a very high-ranking official. And, you know, the attitude behind it is what's interesting. Well, there's two interesting things. The attitude behind it, which is these kind of anti-Obama sort of, we're America, take it or leave it. You know, we're the superpower and you follow our rules or you get off the highway. And the second piece that was interesting to me was this is their self-perception, right? This is not necessarily how everyone around the world views them, but this is their self-perception. So that's certainly not the attitude when Donald Trump is dealing with, say, Russia or with the North Korean leader, about whom he is very kind and deferential. So this is an interesting moment because they have different approaches to different kinds of people.
But that's what I was going to say. So, I mean, is it a doctrine? And I mean, does the very fact that you say they're very different approaches, for instance, the allies in this equation get the, it's our way or the highway, and the adversaries, the authoritarians, get the sort of kid gloves treatment. So again, knowing that, viewing that, observing that, what do you think the doctrine is, if there is one?
Well, I mean, we do know, just to go back to one point for 1 second, the adversaries get kid glove treatments until they don't. One of the things about Trump's approach to foreign policy, national security issues is true about everything. There's no consistency On the policy level, what there is, and this goes to the doctrine question, is there is a level of consistency going back decades, actually. If you look at it, Donald Trump, there are a number of things about Donald Trump that we know to be true. He does have a soft spot for the authoritarian personality. He's always expressed that kind of softness toward authoritarians. He's always believed that the United States is robbed, is ripped off in trade negotiations. He's been for decades now, he's been very dubious about alliances. He always feels that, we should have bilateral relationship, not multilateral alliances. It's not precisely America alone or American isolationism, but he just believes that we're too entangled in alliances, and then because we're the richest player in these alliances, we're always robbed.
Right.
So he does have a kind of quasi-isolationist approach.
Well, interesting, because the French ambassador to the United States told me that they assess it as a Jacksonian plus or minus, whichever way you want to look at it, new policy, that it's uni-isolationism, a combination of unilateralism and isolationism. And I wonder whether that rings true in terms of, for instance, slapping tariffs on steel and other metals on allies and slapping tariffs on China, and where that brings the whole sort of sense of center to.
Right. I don't know if I would frame it, I would refract this through the prism of isolationism so much as just a broad mistrust, not necessarily based in facts as they are observable to most of us, but a broad mistrust of America's friends, and a widespread belief that no one really can be trusted. With again, like a soft spot in a way for authoritarians. The way he speaks about authoritarian leaders is actually one of the most remarkable aspects of this presidency. You saw the way he spoke about Kim. Tough guy, it has to be a tough guy to be in a tough country, and we do bad things too, and who are we to judge? It's this language that's, you know this better than anyone. You've covered foreign policy as I have for a while. This is revolutionary.
Yeah, well,
we're just not used to this. And one of the problems of... Go ahead, sorry.
No, sorry, I agree. We've watched it, we watched it
one of the problems
Singapore.
Right. Well, one of the problems here is that people like you and me, or everyone who watches foreign policy, we don't have a frame of reference for this kind of rhetoric and this kind of behavior. So we don't... We tend to, just as the French ambassador understandably did, we try to impose pre-existing doctrines and ideas onto the way he approaches the world, but none of them is particularly adequate right now.
Right. Well, so I think that really does beg the question of, is that sort of ad hoc, or as we call it, the chaos theory? It's what his people call it, the disruption, the chaos, the maximum disruption, out of which will come something new potentially. But the problem is, and I'm going to read you a tweet that he sent out against one of our main allies, or one of America's main allies, and that's the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. The issue here are the facts. So I would like to just read this. He tweeted today, the people of Germany are turning against their leadership as migration is rocking the already tenuous Berlin coalition. Crime in Germany is way up. Big mistake made over Europe in allowing millions of people who've so strongly and violently changed their culture. So there's so much to unpick there. But I think, don't you, that voters and people should understand that it's just full of misstatements. For instance, new figures show a drop in crime of 5.1% in Germany over the previous year. The number of crimes committed is the lowest since 1992 from the very guy, the Interior Minister, who is challenging Angela Merkel. This idea about violently changing their culture, it has kind of a tinge of that, we don't want to let foreigners in. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, how does a doctrine emerge if the thoughts are based on a misrepresentation of the facts?
Well, I mean, maybe that is it's a fantasy doctrine. Look, it's a fantasy doctrine based on a willful misreading of observable reality, or reality that you and I could observe. I mean, there's always some element of, his base in particular is upset by demographic change in America, and he's projecting that out onto Germany, and he's warning his own supporters, hey, there's this terrible thing going on in Germany that you better watch out for. That it's not necessarily true doesn't matter to him. Remember, his administration is uniquely untethered to empirical fact. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't think this is a surprise to anyone at this point. But it doesn't matter. When he's corrected, he doubles down on the incorrect information. That, again, I go to this point that we're in new territory here, because we have a president who doesn't even pay lip service to what most of the rest of us would call observable fact.
Mm-hmm. So do you think we should have known better? I mean, for instance, Thomas Wright of the Brookings Institution described Trump, this is way back in early 2016, before the campaign really had started in earnest. I mean, about a year before the campaign. Quote, Trump loathes the liberal international order and would work against it as president. Trump also dislikes America's military alliances and would work against them. Trump believes in his bones that the global economy is unfair to the United States. And finally, Trump has an innate sympathy for authoritarian strongmen. So we've talked about the strongmen, but all of these other things that Mr. Wright said in early 2016 have proven to exactly true. This is exactly what President Trump is demonstrating.
Right. Right. Well, that's the interesting thing here, is that what we're so busy watching the chaos and the improvisation and the spontaneous making of policy and the whole reality show quality of this. But meanwhile, under those waves, under those white cap waves, right, there's a remarkably steady understanding. You could call it understanding or misunderstanding, but an understanding about the way the world is organized and the way in which he does not like the role of America in the world and wants to change that. I mean, so he's going to just keep driving and driving and driving at these same points for the duration of his presidency, either for the next 2 years or 6 years. So there's nothing surprising. He's not going to suddenly like NATO. He's not going to wake up and say, you know what, my natural allies are in the EU. This is not going to happen.
And you mentioned NATO. Of course, that's the next big summit on the agenda next month. And he will take this notion of, why don't you all pay up your due, the 2%. And of course, that is something that the Obama administration posited in the most serious way back in 2014. So many American presidents have said that. So I guess, the question is, what do you think is going to happen at the next gathering of allies? And again, in the unprecedented column, no matter what Trump thinks, the words and the language he's used to address allies like Justin Trudeau and others, I mean, I don't want to repeat that language myself, frankly.
Well, here's something. You talk about the next NATO summit. Here's something that will be popular with many Americans, and not just those who voted for Donald Trump. Unlike Barack Obama, you're absolutely right, thought NATO should pony up more money, its fair share, and he said so in his very polite Barack Obama way, the way that we're used to hearing presidents and leaders talk to each other, of course. What Donald Trump will do is say it rudely. He'll say it in their faces. He'll say it repeatedly. He won't give anybody any out. At the end of the day, maybe he's going to get NATO allies to pay their fair share, and he could come back to America and say, look, politeness is overrated. Being kind to your allies in public is overrated. If I don't like these guys, I'm going to say so. I mean, so I'm not advocating or non-advocating for a position. I'm just saying this is what might happen, and he might actually get something, because if you're a NATO ally, you're like, all right, just to get this guy to shut up, or just to get him to leave me alone, maybe we'll pay our fair share. But remember, it's a very, very popular cause in America to get NATO allies to pay what Americans think of as their fair share.
Yeah. The next thing is, I mean, we've talked about Obama, and we've seen many of President Trump's tweets against President Obama. But it strikes me that ever since the early 2000s, American foreign policy, and perhaps to an extent domestic, but we're focusing on foreign, has been a series of massive pendulum swings. If you take the maximum interventionism of President Bush, the wars in, certainly Iraq, which turned into a disaster. If you take the opposite of President Obama, whose pendulum swung all the way over to try to make up for the way America was isolated and disliked and disrespected after the W. Bush years. And now you take the pendulum swing away from Obama as President Trump says we need to be respected rather than taken advantage of. Hence, we need to do everything against, that Obama stood for. That's also part of what they were telling you in the White House, right? It's the F. Obama doctrine right now.
Right. The Trump doctrine is whatever Obama didn't do or didn't believe. Sometimes it's not more complicated than that. You're exactly right. America's had a bipolar foreign policy where either, look, the tragedy of the Bush administration, you could argue, was that they overreacted to events in the Middle East. The tragedy of the Obama administration, some people would argue, is that Obama underreacted to events in the Middle East. We were facing a choice between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton probably was somewhere in between George W. Bush and Barack Obama, was going to bring that pendulum back toward the center a little bit. But now surprise, we got something completely different. The big question, as you know, is are these swings becoming more dramatic, or will we eventually kind of come to some stability? I don't have any particular hope that these swings are going to become less dramatic. There's not much evidence to suggest that. So we're in a unique situation in which the world's superpower cannot decide for itself what role it wants to play in the world.
And I think that leaves a huge number of questions for America and for the rest of the world who are trying to figure it out. Jeffrey Goldberg, editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Support for Amanpour comes from our friends at Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Chances are you're confident when it comes to your work, your hobbies, and your life. Rocket Mortgage gives you that same level of confidence when it comes to buying a home or refinancing your existing home loan. Rocket Mortgage is simple, allowing you to fully understand all the details and be confident you're getting the right mortgage for you. To get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/Amanpour. Equal housing lender, licensed in all 50 states, and MLSconsumeraccess.org number 3030. Been putting off buying new glasses? Zenni Optical offers a huge variety of high-quality, stylish frames and state-of-the-art optics, starting at just $6.95. We've got all the great frame styles you want in materials like titanium, carbon fiber, and high-luster acetate. Plus, Zenni offers prescription glasses and sunglasses. So at this great price, you can build your eyewear wardrobe. You can get 10% off your entire order with code 360. So visit Zenni, Zenni, today at zennioptical.com and use code 360.
Hey, it's Howard Beck, and I've got Marcus Thompson of The Athletic on Bleacher Report's The Full 48.
Kevin Durant was incredible. For 3 straight games,
yes,
he was insanely good in all facets of the game. And in the end, he says, I can't do this without Steph. I guarantee you that matters more to Steph than the Finals MVP.
So check out The Full 48 now on the Bleacher Report app or subscribe at Apple Podcasts.
Let us turn now to my next guest and put these questions, some of them to him. David Sanger, national security correspondent of the New York Times, who was at the recent Singapore summit with North Korea. And he says Donald Trump's unconventional diplomacy, in fact, extracted less from North Korea than previous U.S. presidents have. And in his new book, Sanger asks whether we are ignoring the real threat to Western democracy, which is not nuclear, but cyber warfare. A decade ago, there were only 3 or 4 nations with effective cyber forces. Now there are more than 30. The Perfect Weapon, his new book, explores this new era of digital sabotage, disinformation, and fear spreading. And he joins me now live from New York. David Sanger, welcome to the program.
Great to be back with you, Christiane.
Yeah, and the last time we were together was, in fact, in Singapore as we were reporting and observing and trying to analyze what was going on. There is no doubt that many had a lot of hope and still do that this may have shifted the calculus and shifted at least the psychology for now. But I want to ask you first, you say the president extracted less and came away with less than previous presidents.
Well, certainly on paper he did. The president's argument, Christiane, has been that he changed the dynamic here by doing the meeting top down, basically bringing the two leaders together for the first time since the Korean War ended. And, I give him some credit for that. I mean, we've tried one method for the past 3 or 4 decades, which is to have incremental negotiations with the North Koreans, agree to give them a little bit of aid, get them to pull back on their weapons program. It usually lasts for something between a month and 3 or 4 years, and then it collapses. So the president's theory was actually get a situation of trust between Kim Jong-un and the President of the United States, and then work from there. If it had been at that, and the president had then come back home and said, this is a good start, we have a relationship underway, and now it all depends on whether or not he actually turns his commitment to denuclearize into something far more concrete than North Korea has ever done before, then I think I'd be fairly optimistic. Instead, the president showed up, and in his usual salesmanship way, he said, there is no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea. Well, North Korea's got the same number of weapons, whatever number that is, and we're not certain. It's got the same production facilities. It's got the same intercontinental missiles and the same regional missiles that it had, the same biological weapons, the same chemical weapons. The threat has not changed at all. The mood has changed, at least for a bit.
Yeah, so let me ask you, because just to follow up briefly on the conversation you just heard us having with Jeffrey Goldberg, President Trump did today tweet about North Korea, again, in the context of the Obama administration's experience. And this is what he said. If President Obama, who got nowhere with North Korea and would have had to go to war with many millions of people being killed, had gotten along with North Korea and made the initial steps towards a deal that I have, the fake news would have named him a national hero. Again, it's all put into the context of this obsession with doing everything and criticizing everything Obama did.
It is. And look, there is a legitimate complaint, I think, it's a criticism I make of the Obama administration, that they didn't do enough diplomatically with North Korea. They did not impose the sanctions as fully as they could. They made one diplomatic effort that briefly, and it fell apart. They didn't do anything particularly bold. They focused on Iran. Now, I think the other thing that's maybe going on in President Trump's mind is that everybody keeps saying, and many people write, I've written, that part of the test here is he's going to have to get far more out of the North Koreans than President Obama got out of the Iranians. And it would be a pretty remarkable thing to get North Korea to give up 97% of all of its nuclear fuel. And of course, the North Koreans are much further down the line. They have an actual array of weapons that the Iranians didn't. The inspection regime in Iran has been pretty good. We have no idea what it would look like so far in North Korea.
You know, I'm still scratching my head to figure out how the world is safer having pulled out of a nuclear, arms control deal with the Iranians on this issue. But I agree with you, and the South Koreans have told me, if President Obama, they said to me, had spent a fifth of the time on North Korea that he did on Iran, they may have got further down the line in lines of trying to tame North Korea.
I think that's a very legitimate criticism of, Jeff said before that the mistakes of the Obama administration were usually mistakes of caution and omission. And certainly that is a big theme of the perfect weapon because you see it in a very big way in cyber.
Well, that's what I wanted to get to. The perfect weapon is about what you say is a more real and present danger than perhaps even the threat of nuclear warfare. So what do you expect as the next frontier in this warfare? Do you expect, for instance, North Korea to be using and continuing its cyber warfare against the U.S., even in this conditions? And do you expect Iran to launch a cyber attack on the U.S. in retaliation for pulling out of the deal?
Well, not just the U.S., but around the world. Look, cyber is not as powerful in the initial instance as a nuclear weapon, thank goodness. You're not going to see in one swoop hundreds of thousands of people killed. But it is a very useful weapon that in some ways is the opposite of nuclear. It's stealthy, it's hard to figure out where it came from, and you can dial it up and dial it down. And I think what most Americans and Europeans, others, sort of miss as we think about cyber is that it's on a continuum, exactly the way Every other weapon that you can think of is on a continuum. You've got handguns, and you've got automatic weapons, and you've got missiles, and you've got bombs, and so forth. In cyber, what we have are some weapons that are just for surveillance, some that can go in and manipulate data, some that are useful for information warfare, and then out at the far end, the Stuxnet kind of attack, which was the U.S.-Israeli attack on Israel. You have
on Iran.
On the U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran, that you have cyber weapons that can actually have a real-world effect. And in that case, they sped up or slowed down Iranian centrifuges until they blew up. You've seen other attacks like that. The North Korean attack on Sony Pictures was like that. But in the information area, we've now seen, thanks to the Russians, an entirely new array. And frankly, one of the messages of the book is we are nowhere near prepared for the next run of that, either in the midterm elections or the next presidential election, because we haven't stopped to learn the very big lessons that came out of that attack.
I know, which is so troubling to think that this has been warned about for so many years now, and people like yourself who study it say constantly that we're still not up to the challenge. But let me ask you, you mentioned Stuxnet. Is there a Stuxnet-like generation of cyber warfare to be had against the North Korean nuclear infrastructure?
Well, it's already happened, and it's described at length in the book. President Obama, one of the few things that he did do in a very active way against North Korea was authorize a series of both cyber and electronic warfare attacks on their missile program back in the days when they were shooting off mid-range missiles, the Musadan missile, and they had a failure rate of 88%. They would launch these things, you remember, you'd see the headline, they'd go right into the sea. And the big question, as I dug back through that program and tried to talk to people who were familiar with it, what I learned was the United States never quite figured out how many of those failures were because of the U.S. program and how many were for other causes, that the North Koreans were bad engineers or they had bad parts or they had messed something up. So one of the oddities of cyber, again, unlike nuclear, is sometimes it's very difficult to measure the effects, and this was one of those. Right. And then Kim Jong-un moved to a new generation of missiles, including the ones you saw last year, some of which were intercontinental. And whatever we were doing completely failed. And it's hard to figure out if that's because the North Koreans figured it out or that the United States decided we'd been too obvious and pulled back some.
We've got 30 seconds left, but I want you just to weigh in on a proposal that you made in your book that there needs to be a Geneva Convention-style containment of these weapons. How likely do you think it is that any of these countries would sign up to that?
When the Geneva Conventions happened, they weren't organized by countries. They were really organized by the Red Cross. And I think that this is an idea that Brad Smith of Microsoft has sort of put out. And while it's got some flaws to it, one of the things I like about it is that it does not involve the lengthy treaty negotiations that simply wouldn't work in cyber because no one has the time to go past, negotiate the treaties, get them ratified. The technology moves too quickly. You need something fluid that can get updated every year or two.
It's really fascinating. David Sanger, thank you very much. Your new book, The Perfect Weapon. And that is it for our program tonight. Remember, you can always listen to our podcast and see us online at amanpour.com. And you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for watching, and goodbye from London.
Hey, before you go, we wanted to let you know that we just launched the ability for anyone to advertise on CNN podcasts. You're just a few clicks away from reaching millions of people in a way that you never have before. Advertise for a business, event, or kick off an awareness campaign for your brand. Start today at purewinning.com/CNN. Integrating podcasts into your marketing mix has never been easier. Go to purewinning.com/CNN to get started.